On this episode of Made in America, we're celebrating 2 years of the podcast and the over 100 guests that we've had on. I love asking them the last two questions. What has happened to them that's propelled them to the success they had? And what advice would they give their young self to help them be as successful as possible? In today's episode, we're stringing together some of the highlights of those answers to share with you in the hopes that we can inspire you to do better in the future. A quick interruption to remind you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Our first clip is with recently retired CEO of CBIA, the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Joe Brennan. In this clip, Joe talks about the importance of relationship building and boosting your confidence.
What's one thing, Joe, that you learned early in your career, early in your life, that's helped propel you to the success that you've had?
Oh boy, I'm afraid I already stepped on this one, Ari, but relationship building. Being a lobbyist, you're in a relationship business, and I always laugh with my wife. I always say to her, she doesn't like this, but I always say I'm a type B living in a type A world. But being a lobbyist and at the Capitol and dealing with people and high-powered business people, I really had to work hard on relationship building, and I think that's been really important for me.
What's something, Joe, that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you went back and told young Joe when he listened to you, you think would have been really beneficial to him in his life and career?
That's an easy one, Ari. I really struggled, I called it lack of confidence when I was younger. When I took over at CBI, I met with a coach and did a lot of psychological testing, and he said, you're very confident in yourself. What you have is a high level of self-consciousness. You worry too much about what other people think. So I wish I did that. Chris, who we talked about earlier, gave me a book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bleep, which helped me get through that a little bit. So once I stopped worrying about what other people thought and did what my gut told me was right, then I achieved more success. But I wish I did that much earlier in my career.
Next up is Marissa Minnick, CEO of Excello Tool, a positive manufacturing leader who details the importance of listening to others. Marcy, what's one thing that you learned early in your career or early in your life that you think has helped propel you to all the great success that you've had?
I think one of the most important skills that I've learned in all of my career, and certainly from my parents, and certainly in my marriage, and certainly with my children and with my employees, is the most important thing is to listen. It's incredibly important to make sure that you understand whatever the negotiation you're having with the other side of the coin, because you can't make rash decisions or you can't make compassionate decisions without understanding the other perspective of the other person, and you learn from that. You're able to kind of form your own opinion if you can just quietly sit there and listen to what your alternate conversation is saying to you.
That's tremendous. And last question, what's one thing that you've learned later in your career or later in your life that you wish you could go back and tell young Marcy that if she listened to you would make a huge impact in her life?
I should have been a rock star. It goes back to what I was saying. Like I jumped into going to college without ever understanding really what I wanted to be and what direction I wanted to be. And fortunately, if I had the opportunity that I was able to backpedal and kind of change my direction. But if I had known then what I know now, I would have started my career off in the trades and let it kind of grow from that.
Here's what Tom McGuire from Industrial Heater has to say about being persistent and overcoming challenges. What's one thing that you learned early in your career, or earlier in your life, that's propelled you to the success you've had so far?
Staying persistent, and sometimes it seems like you've arrived at a dead end. Businesses face a lot of challenges, and sometimes you need to work through them rather than just give up. So I found that out early, and I've watched successful people like my grandfather, my dad, and other managers that I've had work through these problems and seem to create miracles. stay persistent.
Yeah. And what's one thing that you've learned later in your career, later in your life, that you feel like if you went back and told young Tom and he listened to you, it'd be a real boost for him?
Let's see. I always say I wish I studied engineering first and then business second or something like that. And spent more time working on the technical side of things. I love business, but I would love to have more fundamental knowledge and use in engineering. I'd say that. Yeah,
that's a really strong. That's a strong takeaway.
I'd recommend that to anybody too, who's if they're thinking about studying business, they know that they love business and they're going to go into it. Great, but consider specializing first and then getting into the business after. I've had to pick up a lot of my engineering acumen after the fact, which is fine, but
would have been easier the
Other
first
way
way around. There you go. Well, listen, but you couple that with the perseverance, and you can still get there. In this next look back, we have Cindy Zoldi, former executive director of the Smaller Manufacturers Association, talking about being a good human and being present in everything we do. What's one thing, Cindy, that you learned early in your career, early in your life, that you think helped propel you to the success and the position that you're in today?
I think what I learned early in my career is that the best thing you can do in any situation is show humanity, listen to people, be something other than self-centric. Look around you, pay attention, be a good human. I think that will always make you successful in whatever you do.
Doing the right thing's always the right
Always.
thing. What's one thing, Cindy, that you learned later in your career or later in your life that you wish you could go back and tell young Cindy that if she listened to you, it'd really make a big positive impact?
I would say that I would focus less on the stuff. You get to a point in your life. I'm actually moving shortly, downsizing. So stuff was always a big thing for me. It was always a big motivator for me as a young person. The sports car, the convertibles, all that kind of silliness. But I think that if I could go back and talk to her, I'd be like, okay, a little less focused on that and a little bit more focused on just being present.
Next, David Lehman, the commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development, talks about the idea of hard work and how everything good in life requires it. What's one thing you learned early in your life, earlier in your career, that you think propelled you to the success that you had, really at Goldman and to where you are today?
I think it's an appreciation for hard work. I still remember working as a diner and a summer camp counselor, and I was in high school. Really appreciating how important it is to work hard and get stuff done. Right? You need, everything requires hard work. Nothing good, in my opinion, happens without hard work. So I learned that at an early age from my parents and from my environment, and I think I still am doing that every day.
Yeah, that's great. One of the quotes I've had on the bottom of my email for years is the harder you work, the luckier you get.
By the way, exactly right. Someone told me you got to make your own luck, and you only do that through hard work. But the people that are the luckiest are the ones that also work the hardest.
Hustle. And then our last rapid fire question is, what's one thing you learned later in your career, later in your life, that you wish you'd go back and tell young David that you wish you'd listened to?
For me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I have a propensity, my wife would say if she was here, that to be a workaholic at times and to get really focused. So I think just understanding that it's a marathon. This is whether it's this job or any other job or life, family, that make sure that you take time to appreciate the present. We have 2 young kids, as I mentioned, so I'm very focused on the long term.
In this clip, Cathy Saint, CEO of McWherter, talks about being a fighter and how that's been critical to all of her success. Cathy, what's something that you learned early in your career or early in your life that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Well, I don't know how much success I've had to start with. I mean, I'm still working on it. But I think I just have always been a fighter. I mean, when I was a little kid, I actually did get into fights in school, but I was always like defending another kid, like there was a kid that got picked on my bus and I let him sit with me. And then one of the other kids shoved me after we got off the bus and we got into a fight and ended up in the principal's office. But I've always been, really a fighter for underdog, hate bullies, really, like to make things nice. And I think, in business, that's a good quality.
No doubt about it. What's something that you learned later in your career or later in your life that if you went back and told young Cathy and she listened to you, would really set her up for success?
Yeah, that's the key part, is that she would ever have listened. But what you said before, that sales is nothing more than really recognizing that you've got something that somebody can really benefit from. And as long as that's there, it makes sense. And if it's not there, you got a new friend.
In this next clip, CJ Bienia from Robotics Advantage, who started his career in software development and then went on to robotics and manufacturing, talks about what propelled him in his career. And it's not what you might think. CJ, what's one thing that you learned early in your career or early in your life that you think's helped propel you to the success that you've had?
Be okay failing. A lot of things I've tried, they don't work, but the ones that have worked work great, and they've propelled me in my career. Be okay failing. Failing just means you tried. I had my guys at work. They'd be like, "Hey, what do you think about this?" I'm like, "You do whatever you think is right. Make a decision. I don't care if it works or not. Figure out if it did work, great. If it didn't, tell me why it didn't work. Don't make the same mistake twice. Learn from your mistake. Be okay failing." There's a lot of kids these days that are not okay failing.
And it's going to be hard to get anywhere good.
You got to be okay to fail. It's how you learn.
That's how we learn, how we grow. What's one thing that you've learned later in your career or later in your life that if you went back to tell young CJ and he listened to you, it'd really bump him up?
Slow down. I was running real quick thinking I was going to become like some bigwig at some place in 5 years after I got out of college. Just slow down, enjoy it. Take the lessons you're learning and actually implement them. Don't figure it out 2 years later that you should have done something else. So just soak it up, enjoy it, slow down. Just slow down. Now I got 2 kids. There's no slowing down.
Don't be in a rush because life comes up on you real fast.
There's a lot of things you can change. Time is not one thing you can change.
In our next clip, Shannon Merriman, Executive Director of Ready CT, talks about being resourceful and how never taking no for an answer has been so critical to her career. What's one thing, Shannon, that you learned early in your career or early in your life that you think helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
I think just being really scrappy and resourceful. I know that the only compliment I've ever gotten from my mother-in-law is that I'm resourceful. And I was like, I think that's a compliment. And I think I've just never taken no for an answer. I've always tried to figure out like the next option or the next approach to trying to do something. I do it usually in a pretty quiet way, but I just kind of put my head down and keep at it. And usually that's served me pretty well.
Gets the job done. What's one thing that you learned later in life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Shannon and she'd listen to you, you'd think have a real positive impact on her life?
I think I would say to not always be so concerned with getting things just right. I mean, I've been victim of letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I've tried to let that go a lot. And I think also knowing that failure is okay as long as you respond in an appropriate way and like kind of make amends. I've almost kind of kept everything so tight that I know exactly where it's going to go next. And I want a little more surprise. And I think I've done that even in the last 5 years, or especially with this role, I've started to kind of walk that walk.
Family, employees, and business. I had a blast talking to Eric Albert from Albert Brothers and really valued what he has to say about what's truly important in life. What's one thing, Eric, that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
I think it really was, and I feel blessed and fortunate to have grown up that understand is what are the really important things in life. Your family, your health, your business is really important. And yes, we have people's lives we have to take, but those all go together. And that you can have balance. I don't know. I'm not always sure I like the word work-life balance. It's more the mix and how do you make it work. But That's really important. 'Cause sometimes we have to work really hard at work. Sometimes we have to work really hard at family. And they don't always equal 50-50. And so that's really important.
That's great. What's one thing that you learned later in life or later in your career that if you go back in time and tell young Eric, and if he'd listened to you, it'd really make a positive impact on his trajectory?
I think the one thing that and this is really a skill-based thing, that if I had really focused more on finance, actually, because I think with that you can do almost anything. I'd always grown up working on the operational stuff, but to really have become good at finance, I think would really have been helpful in the beginning.
I had a great time talking to Karen McWherter from Prospect Machine Products, and she talks about the importance of people, learning, and even putting yourself in timeout. Well, what's one thing, Karen, that you learned early in your career that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Aside from the importance of people, I think that I had to learn that everybody wasn't driving or pushing as hard or as fast as I might have been at the time. I had to learn patience, I guess is a translation of that, so that I wasn't aggravated with a coworker because they didn't see the need to get to where I thought we needed to be.
I'm going to ask this question because maybe I could probably learn from this. How did you, I don't know what the right word is, actuate that patience? What do you tell yourself, or how do you kind of work around that to not get that frustration when someone isn't moving that pace?
I think initially I just had to put myself in timeout, count to 10, regroup. But I think that to learn that patience was understanding where they were coming from, what was on their mind at the time, why they didn't agree with what I wanted to do, as opposed to saying, no, this is what has to be done. I mean, there's always times I think that you have to take that approach, but it isn't always that you have to take that approach.
Pick your battles. What's one thing that you learned, Karen, later in your life or later in your career, that if you went back and told young Karen, and she listened to you, which, maybe,
right,
would have springboarded her career?
Probably to be more open and honest with myself, who I was, where I wanted to head, what I wanted to become.
Backed with his typical energy and based on great success that he's had, Tom Michulanek, president of TOMS, talks about the importance of not measuring yourself up against others. What's something, Tom, that you learned early in your career, early in your life, that you think's propelled you to the success that you've had?
Probably don't measure yourself against others. You see this in the social media life, right? Everyone all of a sudden is stronger than you, faster than you, wealthier than you, cooler than you, looks better, dresses better. And you diminish hey, I have some cool stuff going on too. And just because I don't look like you or dance like you or whatever, lift as much as you do, doesn't diminish what I've accomplished. And when you start caring really about yourself, not the image, your opportunities are endless. Truly are.
That's a good one. What's something, and this is a tough one for a guy as young as you are, but what's something that you've learned later in your career or later in your life that you go back and tell, 20-year-old Tom, that if he'd listened to you, you think it'd make a real positive impact on him?
It doesn't have to happen today, right? Just because the result isn't immediate, and we live in that society, right? It's I buy something, I want it now. It doesn't mean it's not going to be great when you get it. You just can't expect it to happen overnight. And if you trip, get up.
In this clip, listen to what Kristen Gunther from George Schmidt & Company says has helped propel her in her career. If there was one thing that you learned early in your career, earlier in your life, that you think helped propel you to all the success you have, what was that thing?
Being able to multitask on a level that's almost robotic.
You learned that
from
early?
Hollywood. Yeah. I would say if you're able to adapt and multitask and handle whatever's thrown at you, you're going to do okay.
That's fantastic. If you could go back to young Kristen and you could tell her something that you've learned over your career that if she would listen to you, you think would make a real positive impact on her growth trajectory, what would that be?
Probably just be as even keel as possible and worry less, and things will turn out okay no matter what. Just try to understand that the world is going to throw a lot at you, but you'll bounce back. So just stay cool and calm and collected and get through it.
Keep on keeping on.
Keep on keeping on.
In our next clip, positive and inspirational leader Dontapo from Curtis Packaging talks about the critical importance he's seen in his life from just never giving up. So what's one thing that you learned early in your life, earlier in your career, Don, that you think helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's just being tenacious and not giving up. I mean, that is just huge. And that's from everything from sports and playing soccer all the way up until and Curtis. And when we were doing the green side of the business and greening the business, there's no roadmap. You just have to put your head down. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say stupid things in front of people that maybe are scholars in the environmental side. And to me, it's just, you just have to keep going. And honestly, it's following your gut on it. It's following your gut. It's amazing how people just don't use common sense. It's amazing. I probably learned that way young, but it's even to this day, if you take that proverbial step back and analyze it, common sense is going to work probably 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10.
Yeah, and probably
it's scary.
Better and faster.
It's scary, yeah.
What's one thing, Don, that you learned later in your career, later in your life, that you wish you could go back and tell young Don, and if he'd listen to you, it'd make a real positive impact on him?
I would probably say don't make decisions too quickly. I think in an organization of our size, there's times where maybe I should have, instead of just either making a decision and going for it, maybe take the time, reset, sleep on it, and just maybe some of the outcomes would be a little bit different. It doesn't happen too often, but there's just times when you're going and you're hard charging, you're running around, you're doing this, and then you might take the step back and be like, was that the right thing to do? So I'm a little, now it's, I'll take that extra step or the extra pause, maybe breathe, maybe consult with someone if it's something that maybe, was a little sticky or my gut will tell me, as I say, follow my gut. But sometimes you do need to have the opinion of others, your management team, to say, all right, before we just go flying down one path, maybe we should talk.
Get some buy-in from
maybe
some
we
other
should
people.
talk about it first.
That's
so
awesome.
the old ready, shoot, aim.
Yeah, exactly.
Happens
Don.
sometimes.
In this next clip, Deborah Sositsky, founder of Makerspace in Hartford, Connecticut, talks about the importance of constantly moving forward and embracing whatever life has to offer.
So Deborah, what's something that you think you learned or experienced early in your life that helped propel you to the success that you've had?
Take a slice of everything. Keep moving. Just get as much experience as you can, embrace as much, and watch as much as you can. There's so much more that you hear in the unspoken word than in the spoken word.
Absolutely. And what's something that you've learned later in your life or later in your career that you wish you could go back and tell young Deborah that if she listened to you, you think would make a real positive impact on her life?
I'm going to say this in my mother's accent. You don't have to rush.
Slow down.
Yeah, well, and also if somebody needs a decision about business and says, I'm giving you 24 hours. And so if I miss the 24 hours, I don't have to rush. It's important to listen to the inner voice and center yourself and understand all the implications about your decisions.
We're closing out this highlight episode with a great and inspirational leader, Boris Levin from Mott Corporation, as he shares a critically important lesson his parents taught him that's propelled him in his career. What's one thing, Boris, that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think's helped springboard you to all the success that you've had?
I think probably the value of just don't turn any opportunity down. Just take what's in front of you and just work hard at it and do the best you can and learn from it. So I learned from my parents that it's not fail fast, it's to learn fast, more important. And so to me, that was probably the biggest learning from my parents, is about learning fast. And how do you learn fast? How do you get it? get that.
Sort of like your personal why not instead of why.
Yeah, no way.
There you go.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you learned later in your career, later in your life, that if you went back and told young Boris and he listened to you, it'd make a real positive impact on his life?
Just be more humble. You can always be more humble.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct, a Compass MSP company.
As always, thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me today. You know, my goal is to help build a community where we can learn and grow together. Your input, feedback, and engagement is critical to making that happen. Please do comment, like, and subscribe so more and more people can hear what we're doing and join our community of growth and success. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again soon.